The cold wasn't just a temperature. It was a creeping, metallic presence in Thalen Remington's bones. It seeped through the floor of his ancient Ford Ranger, a truck that had been his home, his curse, and his last asset for 6 drifting months. Now, with a final, shuddering cough that sounded like a death rattle, the engine gave up. The heat died first, then the dash lights, leaving him in a silent, steel coffin slowly being entombed by Colorado mountain snow. He slammed a fist against the steering wheel, the impact jarring up his arm. No spark of pain could eclipse the hollow, grinding ache in his chest. This was it. The interview at Ridgeline Summit Resort. It's a last-ditch, borderline pathetic attempt at legitimate, boring security work was in 30 minutes. 20 miles up a winding, frozen pass. He had $97 in the world, a duffel bag of threadbare clothes, and a body that remembered too much for a 26-year-old. The money from his service was still in the bank, a number that felt like blood money. Every penny of it whispered names, echoed explosions in dust-choked air, reflected eyes wide with a fear he'd caused or failed to prevent. He'd rather freeze than touch it. Promiscuity had been a cheaper, warmer distraction, a series of frantic, meaningless collisions in borrowed beds where his scars were either ignored or morbidly fetishized. He'd stopped caring which. His body was a map of failures. Let people read it however they wanted. A pair of sharp, halogen headlights pierced the gray afternoon, glinting off his frosted windshield. A low, predatory growl of a perfectly tuned engine approached, then slowed. Thalen watched, a wary animal, as a Porsche 911, sleek and black as a panther, pulled alongside him. The passenger window slid down silently. The woman inside was warmth and extreme intensity personified. Chestnut hair in a ruthlessly elegant braid. Eyes the color of aged whiskey assessed him through artfully framed lashes. A sharp jawline softened by a mouth that looked made for both commands and sin. She wore a cream-colored sweater that definitely cost more than his dead truck. Breakdown? Her voice was smooth and cultured, with a thread of steel beneath it.
Yeah.
His own voice was gravelly from the cold. Get in. It wasn't an offer. It was a directive, delivered with such effortless certainty that his protest died before it formed. He grabbed his duffel, the movement making his worn jacket gape. He saw her gaze, swift and thorough, rake over the glimpse of scar tissue ridging his collarbone. It was a souvenir from shrapnel. Her eyes didn't flicker with pity or horror. They darkened, intensifying. Something primal and approving flashed in them before she looked back at the road. The interior of the Porsche was a cocoon of heated leather and the subtle scent of her perfume. It's a soft floral, very expensive and dangerous. The silence was thick and charged. Thalen Remington, he said, for something to fill the space. I know. She didn't elaborate. Geraldine McDonald, you have the interview at Ridgeline. How did you? Let's call it a guess. It's the only thing up this road for 20 miles. A faint, knowing smile touched her lips. I'm heading there myself. She drove with a controlled, aggressive confidence that spoke of power, not recklessness. Thalen found his body, always tense, relaxing infinitesimally into the seat. It wasn't trust. It was a surrender to a stronger force, like a current pulling him out to sea. Why stop? He asked, his eyes tracing her profile. Her glance was sidelong, penetrating. Because you were there and I wanted to. The resort emerged from the pines like a fairy tale castle of timber and glass, glowing with warm light against the stark white mountains. She pulled under the portico. The manager's office is through the main lobby, to the left, she said, not looking at him as she plucked a valet ticket from a young man who appeared, wide-eyed, at her window. Thalen hesitated, his hand on the door. Thanks. For the ride. Don't thank me yet. She finally turned her full gaze on him. It was like being pinned by a spotlight. Finish your interview. I'll be waiting for you in the bar. The Aspen Lounge. You'll be waiting? A slow, confident smile. I don't say things I don't mean, Thalen. I'll be waiting. She turned away, the dismissal absolute. The interview was a farce. A board manager in a cheap suit glanced at his resume, asked rote questions about conflict resolution, and offered him a minimum-wage night watchman position before Thalen had even fully sat down. He nodded, numb, the crushing weight of his future settling back onto his shoulders. Gray drudgery, it will be a slow fade. Then he walked into the Aspen Lounge. It was all dark wood, low leather chairs, and a massive fireplace. She sat in a corner booth, a glass of neat amber liquid in her hand, staring into the flames. She'd removed her coat. The sweater hugged curves that were both elegant and formidable. She didn't look up as he approached, but she knew he was there. The air around her seemed to be alive. Sit. She gestured to the space beside her, not opposite. A space that implied intimacy, not negotiation. He sat. The heat from the fire and from her proximity was dizzying. Well, she asked. Night watchman. Starting tomorrow. She made a soft, derisive sound. No, you're not. It's a job. It's an insult. She finally looked at him. The firelight danced in her eyes. You have the eyes of a strategist, Thalen. The bearing of someone who understands cost and consequence. You carry your history in your posture, not as a burden, but as a weapon. Guarding ski equipment for tourists is beneath you. His heart hammered against his ribs. You don't know me. I see more than you think. The way you tracked the room when you walked in. The way you positioned yourself in this booth with your back to the wall, sight-lined to the door. You didn't sit, you took up a post. She took a sip of her drink. I have a proposition. Have dinner with me. Dinner. At my cabin. It's private. We can talk without this. She waved a hand vaguely at the opulent room. Talk about what? About what you're really capable of. About what you want. Her foot brushed his under the table, a deliberate electric contact. And I want to see those scars in better light. The bald statement, devoid of titillation, full of pure, avaricious curiosity, stole his breath. He'd been looked at with lust, with clinical detachment, with morbid fascination. Never with this kind of covetous appreciation. It was a mirror held up to a part of himself he'd disowned. Why, he breathed. Because they're part of the landscape of you. I find you compelling. She leaned closer, her perfume enveloping him. Say yes. There was no universe in which he said no. Her cabin was a sprawling masterpiece of glass and timber, perched on a cliff edge with a view that stole the air from his lungs. Inside, it was all minimalist luxury, a fire crackling in a granite hearth. She moved with ownership, pouring him a drink, her movements efficient and sure. Over a meal she cooked herself, it was seared venison. Wild mushrooms, she dismantled his world. I didn't come to Ridgeline as a guest, Thalen, she said, her gaze holding his over the candlelit table. I bought it. I own it. I own the struggling lumber yard in the valley, the new distillery in town, and 3 construction firms in the city. He froze, a piece of meat halfway to his mouth. You're the owner? I am. I'm expanding. This resort, these businesses, they're the front of a much larger operation. My family's business. She let the words hang. It's not the kind of business you put on a legitimate resume. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The power, the certainty, the sheer scale of her. Your mob. A crude term. We're a family with diversified interests, some grayer than others. She placed her utensils down neatly. I didn't bring you here to offer you a security job, Thalen. I brought you here to offer you a position. With me. Directly. Your mind, your skills, your resilience. They're wasted anywhere else. The room spun. The safe, gray, boring future he'd resigned himself to evaporated, replaced by a precipice of roaring, terrifying color. You want me to be a criminal. I want you to be mine. The words were absolute. I want your loyalty, your discretion, your intelligence. In return, you will have purpose. You will have power you can touch. You will have me. She stood and came around the table. Her fingers, cool and sure, touched the scar on his collarbone, traced it down to where it disappeared under his shirt. A shiver that had nothing to do with cold racked him. I am not a woman who walks away from what she wants, and I want you. All of you. The soldier, the survivor, and the man adrift. I can anchor you. If you let me. It was manipulation. It was a seduction of the highest, most dangerous order, and it was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to him. He was tired of drifting. He was tired of being good for nothing. Here was a woman who saw the weapon he was and didn't flinch, who saw the damage and called it art. He caught her wrist, not to stop her, but to feel her pulse hammering against his fingertips. It was a wild counterpoint to her controlled exterior. Your family business, how illegal are we talking? Her other hand came up to cradle his jaw, her thumb stroking his cheekbone. The kind that gets people arrested. The kind that leaves marks. Her eyes searched his. I have a past, Thalen. There are things I've done to secure what's mine. Things that would stain your honorable soul. He thought of the things he'd done under a flag, with orders, that stained him anyway. He thought of the hollow, bureaucratic morality that had left him here, freezing in a dead truck. People aren't just their worst moments, he heard himself say, echoing a forgiveness he was only just learning to extend to himself. A genuine, breathtaking smile broke across her face. It was like the sun cresting the mountain. No, she whispered, leaning in until her lips were a breath from his. They're also their best choices. Choose this. Choose me. His answer was to close the distance, to kiss her with all the pent-up desperation and surrender of the last 6 years. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, and he was both the conqueror and the conquered. She met him with equal fire, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer, as if she could absorb him through skin and bone. The intimacy that followed was a negotiation of power, without a single article of clothing fully removed. It was her lips tracing the story of a bullet graze on his ribs. It was his hands, calloused and rough, learning the smooth, powerful lines of her back, feeling the strength. It was her whispered confessions against his skin, not of crimes, but of loneliness, of the weight of legacy, of seeing him on that frozen road and knowing, with bone-deep certainty, that he was hers. It was him showing her the deepest, ugliest scar, a twisted knot on his thigh, and her treating it not as a flaw, but as a relic, kissing it with a reverence that unmoored him. It was control given and taken, trust offered and secured, a language more potent than any carnal act. She rewarded his whispered loyalty with a vulnerability she showed no one else. He saw the fearsome mob princess, and he saw the woman beneath, and he wanted both with a fierceness that terrified him. He moved into the cabin that night. It was a week later. He was by her side in the resort's administrative office, learning the legitimate books as a cover for understanding the cash flow of her other enterprises. He had a mind for it, for seeing the patterns, for identifying weaknesses and leverage points. She was right. It fit. Conrad, the grizzled veteran who'd gotten the actual night watchman job, caught him one afternoon after Geraldine had left a possessive, searing kiss on his mouth in full view of the staff. Conrad whistled low, shaking his head. Remington, you realize what's happening, right? You're living the damn romance novel. The scary, rich, gorgeous boss lady who sweeps the broke veteran off his frozen feet? Man, that's not real life. Thalen just smiled, a new, confident curve of his lips. It is now. The idyll was sharpened by underlying tension. Geraldine's phone calls in low, urgent tones. The arrival of hard-faced men in expensive suits who nodded to Thalen with assessing, wary respect once Geraldine introduced him as mine. He was being integrated, vetted by the shadowy edges of her world. The final test came on a crisp afternoon. Thalen was in the office, reviewing logistics for the distillery. It was a perfectly legal operation they were using to launder profits from the less legal construction firms. Geraldine was on a call, her back to the door, speaking in low, rapid Italian. The office door opened without a knock. A man stood there. He was in his 50s, with silver-streaked black hair and eyes like chips of flint. He wore a tailored overcoat and carried the scent of expensive cigars and old violets. He ignored Thalen completely, his gaze fixed on Geraldine's back. "A gra," he said, his voice a gravelly Irish baritone. "You've been keeping secrets from the family." Geraldine went very still. She slowly ended her call and turned. Her face was a mask of cold fury. Seamus, this isn't your territory. You weren't invited. Family doesn't need an invitation. Seamus's eyes flicked to Thalen, dismissive. Who's this? The help. Thalen was on his feet without conscious thought, positioning himself subtly between Seamus and Geraldine. His posture was not aggressive, but solid and immovable. He was a wall. Geraldine's eyes flickered to Thalen, and something in her tense frame softened minutely before hardening again toward Seamus. This is Thalen. He's with me. You'll show him respect, or you can leave the way you came. Seamus laughed, a dry, unpleasant sound. Is that how it is? Setting up your own little kingdom with pretty, broken soldiers? Your father. My father, Geraldine cut in, her voice like a scalpel, is not here. This is mine. My business. My resort. My man. She stepped forward, now shoulder to shoulder with Thalen, a united front. You deliver your message and you go, Seamus. We have an understanding with the family. I am not disrupting your flows. Do not disrupt mine. The air crackled with unspoken history and threat. Seamus's eyes narrowed, measuring Thalen anew, seeing not just a bodyguard but a partner standing firm. The dynamic had changed. The understanding is being reviewed, Seamus said finally, his tone less certain. Times change. People get ambitious. You should come home, Geraldine. Discuss it. My home is here now. Her hand found Thalen's at her side, her fingers lacing with his in a gesture of stunning, public solidarity. My future is here. The answer is no. Seamus held her gaze for a long, dangerous moment, then gave a curt, grudging nod. I'll convey your sentiments. He turned his flinty gaze on Thalen one last time. Look after her, boy. The world she moves in eats pretty things for breakfast. After he left, the silence was thick. Geraldine's hand was trembling slightly in his. Thalen turned her to face him, cupping her face. Are you okay? She leaned into his touch, the mask falling to reveal the vulnerable woman beneath. He's a relic, a bully from my father's court. They don't like that I'm building something separate. He threatened you. He tested you. She searched his face. And you stood, not as my employee, as my equal, in front of a man who terrifies most made men. You're not most women, Thalen said simply. I'm not going anywhere. It was the final, irrevocable choice. He had seen the deepest danger of her world look him in the eye, and he had planted his feet. Months flowed. Thalen's role solidified. He was her strategist, her confidant, her protector, her lover. He wore tailored suits that fit his warrior's frame. He handled negotiations with subcontractors and, in quiet back rooms, with union bosses and rival interests. He found he had a talent for the gray, for seeing the legal path and the less legal shortcut, and choosing the one that best secured what was theirs. The guilt over the blood money faded, replaced by a fierce pride in what they were building, a real empire, brick by brick, deal by deal, with her. One evening, a year to the day after the frozen road, they were in their cabin. The mountains were purple in the twilight, the first stars piercing the sky. Geraldine was uncharacteristically quiet, pacing by the wall of glass. She stopped and turned to him. There was no command in her posture, only a raw, naked tension. Thalen. He put down his tablet. What's wrong? She walked to him, knelt before his chair. It was a gesture so shocking from her it stole his breath. She took his hands in hers. Her eyes were blazing with a vulnerable ferocity he'd never seen. I have spent my life taking what I want, she said, her voice low and intense. I took businesses. I took territory. I took you from that road. But this I cannot just take. It must be given. She released one of his hands and pulled a small, black velvet box from her handbag on the table next to her. She opened it. A simple, heavy platinum band lay inside, its surface etched with a subtle, interlocking pattern of mountain peaks and cables. It was a fusion of his ordeal and her rescue. My life before you was a series of transactions and power plays, she continued, her gaze locked on his. You taught me it could be a partnership. You saw my darkness and called it part of my strength. You stand beside me, not behind me. Marry me, not for my empire, not for my money. Marry me because you choose to. Because I am yours as utterly as you are mine. Build this life with me, officially and irrevocably. Tears he didn't know he could still shed pricked his eyes. He saw the fearless Mafia princess, offering him her heart with the same terrifying certainty with which she'd offered him a ride. He saw the woman who found beauty in his scars, who valued his mind, who had given him a world when he had nothing. He slid from the chair to kneel with her, taking the box from her trembling hands. He removed the ring. You once told me to choose you, he said, his voice thick. It was the easiest, hardest, best choice I've ever made. He slipped the ring onto his own finger. It fit perfectly. Yes, I choose you yesterday, today, and every tomorrow that is coming. The kiss they shared was a vow, a merger and a victory. Later, tangled together before the fire, the platinum band cool on his finger, he understood the title of his new life. Belonging to dangerous women. It wasn't about ownership. It wasn't about coercion. He belonged to her because he'd chosen her, with eyes wide open to the danger and the darkness and the glorious, thrilling power of it all. She, the most dangerous woman he'd ever known, had humbled herself and chosen him back. On the frozen road, he'd been a man breaking down. Here, in the warm light of their stolen empire, wrapped around the woman who'd stopped for him, he was finally, completely home. This isn't a meet-cute. It's a takeover. She didn't just give him a ride, she claimed him. Welcome to Belonging to Dangerous Women Book 2, The Frozen Road to Her Empire. Want more dark mafia romance with alpha female leads? Smash subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Want more? This is just the beginning. Like this video if you're obsessed with Geraldine. Subscribe for the next story in the Belonging to Dangerous Women series. Comment below. What's the one thing that would make you get in the car with a stranger?